If you're watching this, that means it's after July 15th, 2024. And if you're looking to buy a house, listen up, because there has been some changes about how buyer agency works in the state of New Hampshire after the recent NAR settlement. And I'm going to be explaining what affects what in this video. So there's two really big changes that are coming up from this settlement that are in effect now because it is after July 15th. I'm making this currently on July 15th. So if you're watching it, that means they're in effect. And it's kind of not necessarily changing anything about the whole way to buy a house. Nothing about the actual process of putting in an offer, going through inspections and buying. Nothing with that. It's more on the upfront end when you're actually going to get an agent and start looking at properties. So the two changes that are happening, one is kind of a small thing that doesn't necessarily affect the buyers as much. And that is when agents like me are looking in the MLS for properties for you as a buyer. Back in the day, the MLS sheet that we would look at the bottom, it would show what percentage of commission that is being offered to a buyer's agent that of course brings a buyer and produces a sale. That is no longer applicable. They cannot show that on public information. It doesn't mean they can't offer it. I'll get into that later. And the second change is that you as a buyer have to have some type of buyer representation form signed with an agent before you go look at any house. Any house, even if you're contacting the listing agent, you still have to sign some form of a buyer's representation. So I'm gonna start with the first one, the one that doesn't affect you as much because it's gonna be a little bit shorter. And that is changing the public availability of being able to see if the listing is offering a commission to a buyer's agent who again brings a buyer to the transaction. And again, this has completely gone away. So when I go in the MLS now, I look and nothing mentions commission at all. So the thing with this that I feel like is kind of becoming a misconception is a lot of people thought through this NAR settlement that they were going to do away with buyer's commissions completely being offered from the seller. And that's not true. Most sellers are still offering it because listing really hasn't changed. A few things have changed in the actual listing agreement, which just breaks down how people get paid. So it used to just be like you'd put in a percentage and then it was up to the listing agent to split that percentage. Now it clearly states, say 2% is going to the listing agent, 2% is being offered to a buyer's agent, and then it even has a spot for 2% to the listing agent if the listing agent brings a buyer. So it really clarifies what's going to what. But again, this cannot be public information. So all it's really changing is making us as agents, when we go to ask for a showing or go to ask for additional information for you as a buyer, we have to just ask them blatantly right there, hey, are you offering a commission? So you as a buyer can know, hey, am I going to have to pay for this out of pocket, or are they going to be able to cover it in this transaction? And honestly, I just find this really silly because it doesn't make much sense in my head, because as a seller, they've always had the ability to negotiate the percentage that they pay to anybody. The selling agent, if they want to offer a buyer's agent commission, they've always had that. So this again is just clarifying the form, but now you can't make it public. And if it hurts anyone at all, I really think it's the seller that gets hurt here, because if you're a seller and you're offering a 2% commission, that's an incentive for a buyer's agent like me to bring a buyer to you, because guess what? They already know that they're going to get paid from the seller. Their buyer doesn't have to worry about that cost. So again, I just find this silly. I don't really get why they did it. I think as a seller, it just hurts because offering 2% is a good marketing tool. It's just like a sale on a product. You're not just going to be like $100 off this product, but you don't tell anybody about it until they actually buy it. Like, it just seems kind of silly, you know? So it's really just adding more communication steps for buyer's agents and selling agents, which is going to be tough for selling agents because they get blown up all the time in this very hot market. So to everyone with a lot of listings, I hope the best for you, and I hope you find some way to automate it. All right, now for the really big change. And that again is, if you're a buyer looking in New Hampshire, before you go see a house, you have to have some form of buyer representation signed with an agreement showing how much that buyer's agent will get paid. So to give a little bit of context, the way it was before July 15th was you would just contact an agent, hey, I want to go see this house, and the agent typically most agents they'll just go show you it. And when you're there at the actual showing, typically the agent will give you what was called a brokerage relationship form. And this just shows that buyer that, hey, you're not my client yet. You are my customer, so I can do certain tasks for you. But if you want everything that comes along with a buyer's agent, that would usually, people would produce that maybe the second showing, or at least introduce it to them at the first showing, and not necessarily shove it in their face and be like, hey, you have to sign this. But now we have to shove paperwork in your face. It's not an option. Literally, if you want to go see the house, you have to sign something. And I feel like it's just going to be a pain in the butt. But before I get into the details of it, I'm going to dive a little bit more into what this actually means for you. So just to clarify, I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but again, if you see any house, you have to sign something except an open house, which makes 0 sense. I don't get that one bit. And then, like, even if you, again, contact the listing agent to go see the property, you have to sign a buyer's representation form, which I find a complete conflict of interest if you're signing a representation form with the listing agent of the property, because they have to keep the seller best interest in mind, but they have to sign something with you to be able to show you the seller's house. Seems like a conflict of interest. But the way this is going to go right now is there are 3 different types of agencies that you can get when you first go see a house with an agent. So the first one is called a facilitator. And this is probably the crappiest representation you can get in real estate, because it's literally just, you're basically getting a door opener who can write contracts. In the facilitator role, you are literally just facilitating the whole process. You're giving the paperwork, you're filling out the forms, but you can't put any input of your own to help out your buyer. You can't say, hey, I think this house is overpriced. You can't say, hey, maybe we should include this in the negotiations. You just type. That's really all you do. You don't get to help them out at all. And this is the first one that, again, I don't really see it being very helpful for buyers, because, again, you're mainly just relaying public information and helping write contracts as a facilitator. The next one is called a non-exclusive buyer's agency. And this is basically a regular buyer's agency form, which means your agent, me, would be your full buyer's agent. But the non-exclusive part is where this one gets weird. So you can sign this with an agent, but that doesn't lock you down to that particular agent. You can still go use another agent. So I don't necessarily see why any agents would be pushing this one, because when you get into a buyer's agency agreement, it's really like tying you two together, because, again, you're trying to help that person find a house and you want their best interest in mind. But, like, if you're signing a non-exclusive buyer agency, do you really think that buyer's agent's going to be working super hard for you if they know it doesn't matter how much they work hard for you? You can literally just call up another agent and use them at any point in time for any reason whatsoever. It just seems kind of silly on that matter. I think I don't have to go into depth any more than that. I think you kind of get it. It just seems a little weird. And then the last one is the OG one. It's exclusive buyer's agency representation. And this one is where they're fully in your corner. They are your buyer's agency. They're really your only contact in the whole process of buying a house for the real estate side. Of course, not really lender and all that. That is the best one. It's the most common one, because, again, they're having your best interest in mind throughout the whole transaction. So this is the one that I really think most buyers should get, especially now that you have to sign something. Now is where I'm going to get into a little bit of a more confusing part of the process, and that is deciding on how you're going to pay your buyer's agent and the timeline for these contracts you now have to sign to go see a house. So first we'll start with a pay. And this is where it gets a little bit wonky, because you can literally charge anything. You can charge a percentage of the sales price, you can charge a flat fee, you can charge per hour, per showing. Really, whatever you want to base your compensation off, you can kind of just agree upon it. And it's a little bit weird. I still think that the normal going rate type deal is going to be a 2% buyer's agency, because, again, not much has changed on the seller side. So a lot of people are still going to be offering that 2%. They just can't make it public. Silly. But that's how it is. So again, if you sign a form if you sign a contract and you agree to pay the buyer's agent 2%, your agent, you go to reach out to a listing and you have your buyer's agent ask, hey, are you offering a commission with this listing? If they offer 2%, great. You don't have to bring anything additional to pay your buyer's agent to the closing. If they don't offer the 2%, you have to come up with that, or maybe it's just not the right house for you. That's where it's going to get a little bit weird. Now, for the timeline of these contracts, you're probably asking, how long do they last? Because again, you have to sign something to go see a house. And they are super, super variable, highly variable, because you can do it for really whatever. You can do it for a day. You can do it for a certain house. You can do it for a week. You can do it for a month. You can do it for 6 months. You can do it for a certain area, a certain county, a certain town. It's a lot. In my eyes, all this is just making it so much more confusing for you as the buyer. I don't necessarily get it, because it just seems confusing. It really just seems confusing. Like, I think the way I'm going to be doing it is I'm going to approach it like the first showing, because it's hard with the first showing. The first showing is there to like build rapport and see if you guys even want to work together. So I think the first one, I'm going to do like a facilitator one for just one house. And then at the house, you kind of go over more, invite them to a buyer's presentation so you can actually show your worth as a buyer's agent to them. And then you can talk more about an actual buyer representation form where that really secures you two in a relationship, because it seems silly just pushing that on directly. That seems not rude, but it seems too pushy. So I feel like the facilitator is a good one, but again, at the showing, it's not like I can be telling you much unless we get that buyer's representation signed form first. So it's a lot to talk about, and these are kind of my last thoughts on it. Overall, I feel like they're just unneeded changes. I get the sellers are feeling shorted and they thought that stuff was happening behind the scenes that really wasn't. But all this is adding is just more paperwork, confusion, communication to everyone involved. Everyone. It's hurting sellers because you can't show that you're offering stuff. It's hurting buyers because now they're pushed to sign something before even seeing a house. It's hurting the agents because now we have to do more communicating to each other, more things, just so much more for really nothing changing in the actual process. And I also think this one's probably the most important. I just think it hurts the whole relationship building part of being a real estate agent. Because again, those first 1 to 3 showings are kind of where you're going out and it's just like feeling each other out. Am I liking this agent? Do I actually want to work with this buyer? Am I actually going to be able to help this buyer? Is this agent actually having my best interest in mind? Are they getting on the same page? Those things really build a relationship before bringing a contract into it. Now just having to shove that in your face with the first thing, hey, I'd like to see 123 Main Street. All right, sign this. It's just, I don't know. It just seems really ingenuine and kind of disconnects from the building the relationship, because that's what real estate is a relationship building business. So those are my closing thoughts on the matter. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. If you're a buyer looking in New Hampshire, what do you think about it? Again, these contracts can be highly variable. They can be for one property, for 1 day, 1 hour. It's so confusing. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours again down below in the comments. And if you're looking to buy a house in New Hampshire, reach out to me because I would be happy to help, and I will catch you guys next week.